No one wanted to serve him, and maybe that was exactly what he was counting on. The low hum of conversation drifted through the upscale Manhattan restaurant, silverware clinking softly against porcelain, warm amber lights casting a polished glow over marble tables and tailored suits, the kind of place where every guest looked like they belonged, except him. He sat alone near the back, his posture relaxed but his presence off. His coat was worn, not in a fashionable way, but in a way that suggested years, maybe weather, maybe something harder. A few strands of dark hair fell slightly out of place, his jaw unshaven, his eyes calm but unreadable, like he was watching everything without being seen. Waitresses passed his table without stopping. One glanced, hesitated, then turned away quickly. Another whispered something under her breath, shaking her head. Even the manager, Victor Hale, standing near the bar in his crisp navy suit, made a subtle gesture, ignore him. This wasn't the kind of customer they wanted tonight. Not with investors in the room, not with critics possibly watching. At the far end of the floor, Lily Carter adjusted the strap of her apron, her fingers slightly trembling as she balanced a tray of sparkling water. Her shift had already stretched past 10 hours, her feet aching in cheap black flats that pinched at the heel, but she kept moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the overdue rent notice folded in her locker, the final warning printed in bold red letters. She followed the rhythm of the room, smiles, nods, quick steps, until her eyes landed on him. That table. The one everyone was avoiding. For a moment, she hesitated. She saw the way others looked past him, like he didn't belong, like he was a problem waiting to happen. She saw Victor glance in her direction, just briefly, then look away, as if daring her to make the wrong move. Lily swallowed, her grip tightening around the tray. She could walk away. Everyone else had. But something about the way he sat there, not angry, not demanding, just still, pulled at her. Like he wasn't expecting anything anymore. Like he already knew how this would go. She set the tray down at a nearby station, wiped her hands on her apron, and before she could overthink it, she walked toward him. Each step felt louder than it should have, her heartbeat syncing with the soft jazz playing in the background. A couple at the next table paused mid-conversation, watching. One of the other waitresses subtly shook her head. Lily ignored them. She reached his table and forced a small, steady smile. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm despite the tightness in her chest. "My name is Lily. I'll be taking care of you tonight." The man looked up slowly, as if he hadn't expected anyone to speak to him at all. For a brief second, surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something quieter, curiosity. His eyes met hers, sharp, observant, missing nothing. "Will you?" he asked softly. It wasn't rude. It wasn't warm either. Just a question. Lily nodded, pulling out her notepad even though her hands were still slightly cold. "Yes, sir. What can I get started for you?" Around them, the room kept moving, but something had shifted. Conversations lowered. Eyes lingered. Victor's expression tightened from across the floor. And at that table, something invisible had just begun, a test no one else could see, except the man everyone had ignored, and the one woman who didn't. Lily felt his eyes on her even as she steadied her breath, the small notepad in her hand suddenly feeling heavier than it should, as if every word she was about to write carried more weight than just an order, and for a second she wondered why this table felt different, why this man who had said almost nothing somehow filled the space with something she could not quite name, but she pushed the thought aside because she did not have the luxury to hesitate, not tonight, not with rent due in 3 days and a manager already watching her too closely from across the room, so she straightened slightly and repeated, softer this time but just as steady, "Can I get you something warm to start, maybe coffee or tea?" The man studied her for a moment longer, his gaze calm but precise, like he was measuring not just her words but the space between them, then he leaned back slightly in his chair and said, "Coffee sounds fine, black, no sugar," his voice even, almost casual, but there was something deliberate in the way he said it, as if he was waiting to see how she would respond to something so simple. Lily nodded quickly, writing it down even though she would have remembered. "Of course, I will have that right out," she said, offering a small polite smile before turning toward the service station. But as she stepped away, she could feel the shift again, the quiet ripple moving through the room, the subtle glances from other servers, the raised brow from a bartender polishing a glass, and most of all Victor, whose expression had hardened just enough to send a clear message without words. This was not a table worth her time, this was not a guest that mattered, but Lily kept walking, because she had already made her choice the moment she stopped at that table. And turning back now would mean becoming exactly like everyone else who had looked past him, and something in her refused to do that, even if it cost her, even if it made things harder. She reached the coffee station, poured a fresh cup, making sure it was hot, steady, clean, the way she would for any guest, maybe even more careful, then grabbed a small folded napkin and wiped the rim without thinking, a habit she had picked up after years of watching customers notice the smallest details. And as she carried it back, she noticed something else. The table next to his had gone quiet, the couple there pretending to focus on their menus while clearly listening, curiosity hanging in the air like static. Lily placed the cup gently in front of him. "Careful, it is hot," she said softly, instinctively adjusting the handle so it faced his right hand, a small gesture, barely noticeable, but deliberate. The man glanced at the cup, then back at her, and for the first time there was the faintest shift in his expression, not quite a smile, not quite surprise, but something closer to interest. He picked up the cup, took a slow sip, then set it back down with the same measured calm. "Thank you," he said, and it was simple, but there was something different about it, like he meant it, like he was not used to saying it. Lily nodded. "You are welcome. I will give you a moment to look over the menu," she said, but before she could step away, his voice stopped her again. "What do you recommend?" he asked, and it was such a normal question, something she heard dozens of times a night, but coming from him it felt different, like it was part of something else, something unfolding just beneath the surface. Lily hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then answered honestly, "Not the most expensive item. Not the one the manager pushed for profit, but the one she knew was actually good. The herb roasted chicken is our best dish. It is simple but done right," she said, and for a moment, the man just looked at her again, that same quiet, searching gaze, as if every answer she gave was adding to something he was building in his mind, unseen, unspoken. And across the room, Victor's jaw tightened, because something was happening at that table that was not supposed to happen at all. The air around the table seemed to tighten as Lily's answer lingered between them, simple and honest, not rehearsed, not designed to impress, and for a moment Ethan Caldwell did not respond. He simply watched her, his fingers resting lightly against the side of the coffee cup, his gaze steady in a way that made most people uncomfortable. But Lily did not look away, not out of defiance, not out of confidence either, but because she had learned something over the years, that people who were overlooked noticed when you treated them like they mattered, and people who were used to being served noticed when you were genuine, and she chose to be the second kind of person even when it cost her, even when it made her stand out in ways she could not afford. Ethan finally nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Then I will take that," he said, closing the menu without even glancing down at it again. And that alone was enough to draw attention from the nearby tables, because no one ordered like that here, not without asking about prices, not without trying to impress someone, but he had not asked anything else, just trusted her, and that trust, small as it was, felt heavier than any order she had taken all night. Lily wrote it down quickly. "I will have that out shortly," she said, turning to leave, but just as she stepped away, his voice followed her again, softer this time but unmistakably intentional. "You did not recommend the most expensive dish," he said, and she paused, glancing back over her shoulder, unsure if it was a question or a statement. "No, sir," she replied honestly, "I recommended the best one," and for a brief second, something shifted in his expression again, something almost like approval, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same calm, unreadable look. Lily moved toward the kitchen, her steps steady but her mind racing now, because she could feel it. This was no longer just a table, no longer just another customer. Something about this interaction was being watched, measured, not just by him, but by everyone around them. She pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen where the noise hit her all at once, orders being called, pans clattering, heat rising from the grills. But even here, the tension followed her. One of the line cooks raised an eyebrow. "You took that guy's table," he muttered, and another server leaned in slightly, whispering. Victor said to leave him alone. Lily exhaled slowly, setting the order ticket down. "He is still a customer," she said simply, but even as she said it, she knew that was not how things worked here, not really, because some customers mattered more than others. Some were worth attention, worth effort, worth respect, and others were quietly pushed aside, ignored, made invisible, and tonight, that man had been placed in the second category by everyone except her. As the chef plated the herb-roasted chicken, Lily made sure everything was right, the presentation clean, the portion generous, the garnish placed carefully, because if she was going to do this, she was going to do it fully, no shortcuts, no half effort. She picked up the plate, steadying it with both hands, and as she walked back onto the floor, she noticed Victor again, standing near the bar, watching her now without even pretending not to, his eyes sharp, calculating, like he was waiting for her to slip, to make a mistake, to prove that she should have stayed away from that table. Lily ignored him and continued forward, placing the dish gently in front of Ethan. Herb-roasted chicken, she said softly, just like I promised. Ethan glanced down at the plate, then back up at her, and this time, there was no hiding it. A flicker of something real crossed his face, something that looked very much like respect, but behind that, deeper, quieter, something else was forming. Something Lily could not see yet, because this was no longer just about a meal, and for Ethan, this moment was becoming something far more important than anyone in that room could possibly understand. Ethan did not reach for the fork right away. Instead, he let the plate sit in front of him as if he was studying more than just the food, his eyes moving briefly from the carefully arranged herbs to the golden crisp skin of the chicken and then back to Lily, who still stood there for a second longer than usual, unsure why she felt the need to wait, maybe because something about his silence felt intentional. Like every pause was part of a conversation that had not been spoken yet. Finally he picked up the fork and knife, cutting into the chicken with slow precision, the sound soft against the plate, controlled, deliberate, and when he took the first bite, he did not react immediately. He chewed thoughtfully, his gaze lowering just slightly, as if measuring the experience against something internal, something invisible to everyone else in the room. Lily held her breath without realizing it, then he nodded once, almost to himself. You were right, he said quietly, and the simplicity of those words carried more weight than any compliment shouted across the dining room. Lily allowed herself a small exhale, a hint of relief softening her shoulders. I am glad you like it, she replied, her voice steady again, but before she could step away, a sudden sharp voice cut through the calm. Lily, Victor called from across the room, not loud enough to cause a scene, but firm enough to demand attention. Lily turned, her stomach tightening slightly as she saw him walking toward them, his polished shoes silent against the floor, his expression controlled but clearly irritated. We need to talk, he said under his breath as he reached her side, his smile fixed for the sake of nearby guests, but his eyes telling a different story. Lily hesitated for just a second, glancing back at Ethan, unsure whether to leave, but Ethan did not look up this time. He simply continued eating, as if unaware of the tension unfolding beside him. Though something about the slight tilt of his head suggested otherwise, Lily followed Victor a few steps away, just far enough to avoid drawing attention. What are you doing? Victor muttered, his voice tight. I told everyone to leave that table alone. Lily kept her voice low, calm. He is a paying customer, she said simply. Victor let out a quiet, frustrated breath. That is not the point, he replied, glancing briefly over his shoulder toward Ethan. We have standards here, we have a reputation, and guests like him do not fit that image. Lily felt something shift in her chest, a familiar frustration rising, but she kept her tone respectful. He has not caused any problems, she said. He has been polite. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. You are missing the bigger picture, he said. Investors are here tonight, important people, and the last thing we need is someone like that making them uncomfortable. Lily followed his gaze for a moment, noticing the well-dressed group near the front, laughing, sipping expensive wine, completely unaware of the quiet conversation happening just a few feet away. Then she looked back at Ethan, still sitting alone, eating slowly, calmly, not disturbing anyone, not asking for attention, and something about the contrast made her decision feel even clearer. He is not the one making people uncomfortable, she said quietly, and for a brief moment, Victor said nothing, his expression hardening as he studied her, as if trying to decide whether to push further or let it go. Finally he straightened slightly, adjusting his cuff. Finish the table, he said. His tone clipped, but after that, I want you off the floor for the rest of the night. Lily blinked, surprised. Off the floor, she repeated softly. Victor nodded once. Consider it a warning, he said, then turned and walked away without another word. leaving Lily standing there, the weight of his decision settling in. This job was not just a paycheck, it was her stability, her safety, and she had just put it at risk over one table, over one stranger. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, then turned back toward Ethan, expecting him to be focused on his meal, but instead, he was looking at her again. His expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, aware, as if he had heard more than he should have, as if he understood exactly what had just happened, and in that quiet moment, something shifted once more, because this was no longer just a test of kindness, it was becoming a line she had chosen to cross, and neither of them was stepping back from it now. Lily walked back to the table slowly, aware now of every step, every glance that followed her, the quiet tension in the room no longer subtle but present, like something waiting to unfold, and as she reached Ethan's table again, she forced her shoulders to relax, refusing to let Victor's words linger in her posture, because if this was going to be her last table of the night, she would finish it the same way she started, with dignity, with care. "Is everything tasting all right?" she asked gently, her voice steady despite the quiet storm building inside her. Ethan set his fork down this time, not abruptly, but with intention, his gaze lifting to meet hers again, and there was something different now, something sharper, more focused, as if the moment between them had shifted from observation to decision. "It is," he said, pausing for just a second before adding, "You handle pressure well." Lily blinked slightly, caught off guard by the comment. "I am just doing my job," she replied, though the words felt smaller than what had actually happened. Ethan tilted his head just a fraction, studying her again. "Most people would have walked away," he said quietly, not accusing, not praising, simply stating a fact. Lily hesitated for a brief moment, then answered honestly. "Most people have a choice," she said, her voice softer now. "I do not always have that luxury." The words lingered between them, heavier than she intended, and for the first time, Ethan's expression shifted in a way that was unmistakable, something deeper, something that looked very much like understanding. But before either of them could say more, a sudden disturbance broke the moment, a loud laugh from a nearby table, one of the well-dressed guests leaning back in his chair, glancing openly toward Ethan with a smirk that was not quite hidden. "Hey," the man called casually, his tone light but edged with something dismissive. "You sure you are in the right place?" A few quiet chuckles followed from his table, not loud enough to cause a scene, but enough to make the intention clear. Lily felt her chest tighten instantly, her instinct telling her to ignore it, to move on, to protect herself, but something inside her refused to let it pass. Not after everything that had already happened, not after the way Ethan had been treated from the moment he walked in. She turned slightly toward the man, keeping her tone polite but firm. "Sir, if you need anything, I will be happy to assist you at your table," she said, redirecting without escalating. The man raised his eyebrows, amused. "Relax, I was just asking," he said, leaning back again, dismissing it as if it meant nothing, but the damage had already been done. The room had felt it, the shift, the line that had been crossed. Lily turned back to Ethan, expecting him to react, to respond. But he did not. He simply watched her, his expression calm, almost unreadable again, but his eyes were different now, sharper, more certain, like something had just been confirmed, something he had been waiting to see. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. Lily shook her head slightly. "Yes, I did," she replied, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, just quiet conviction. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers, and for a brief second, the noise of the restaurant faded into the background, because in that moment, something had changed completely. This was no longer just a test of service, or patience, or professionalism. This was something else, something deeper. And as Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his worn coat, pulling out something small, something Lily could not yet see clearly, the air between them tightened once more, because whatever happened next was going to change everything, not just for him, but for her too. For a moment, Lily could not move, her eyes fixed on Ethan's hand as he slowly pulled out what looked like a simple, worn leather card holder, nothing flashy, nothing that matched the quiet weight building in the air around them, and yet the way he held it, steady and deliberate, made it feel like something far more significant. He opened it without breaking eye contact, sliding a single card halfway out before placing it gently on the table between them. Not pushing it toward her, not presenting it with any sense of drama, just letting it sit there, waiting. Lily hesitated, her instincts pulling in two directions, part of her wanting to ignore it, to stay within the safe boundaries of her role, and another part, quieter but stronger, telling her that this moment mattered, that whatever was happening here was no longer ordinary. She reached for the card slowly, her fingers brushing against the edge before lifting it, her eyes dropping down to read, and for a split second, nothing made sense. Then everything did. The name printed in clean, understated lettering, Ethan Caldwell, followed by a title that seemed completely out of place with the man sitting in front of her, Chief Executive Officer, Caldwell Hospitality Group. Her breath caught, not dramatically, not loudly, but just enough to make her chest tighten, because she knew that name. Everyone in the industry did. It was the company that owned half the high-end restaurants in the city, including this one. Her grip on the card tightened slightly as she looked back up at him, searching his face for something, anything that would tell her this was not real, but his expression had not changed, calm, composed, almost detached, as if this reveal was not meant to impress her, but simply to confirm something he already knew. "You own this place," she said quietly, the words barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded once, not with pride, not with arrogance, just acknowledgement. "I do," he replied, and the simplicity of it made it even heavier. Lily felt 1,000 thoughts rush through her mind all at once. The way the staff had ignored him, the way Victor had spoken about him, the way that guest had laughed, and suddenly, the entire night shifted into a different shape, one she had not seen before, one she had unknowingly stepped into. "Why are you here like this?" she asked before she could stop herself. And for the first time, Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering just enough that only she could hear. "Because people show you who they are when they think you are nobody," he said, his eyes holding hers steadily. "And tonight, I needed to see that for myself." Lily swallowed, the weight of his words settling deeper than she expected, because this was not just about him anymore. This was about everything she had just witnessed, everything she had been part of. "And what did you see?" she asked quietly. Ethan's gaze flickered briefly across the room, taking in the staff, the guests, the polished illusion of perfection, then returned to her. "Exactly what I expected," he said, then paused for just a fraction of a second before adding, "except for one thing." His eyes softened, just slightly. "You." Lily felt her breath catch again, not from the compliment, but from the realization of what that meant, because in a room full of people, in a system designed to favor certain faces, certain appearances, certain assumptions, she had done the simplest thing, and somehow, it had become the most important thing. She glanced down at the card again, then back at him. "I did not know," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "That is the point," he replied, leaning back once more, the calm returning to his posture, but now it carried a different kind of authority, one that did not need to be announced, only revealed. And as Lily stood there, still holding the card, still processing the moment, she realized something else too. This was not the end of the test, this was only the beginning, because across the room, Victor had just turned, his eyes landing on Ethan at the exact moment he reached for the card in Lily's hand. And in that instant, everything was about to change for everyone in that room. Victor did not move at first, but the moment his eyes locked onto the card in Lily's hand, something in his expression cracked, just slightly, just enough to reveal the sudden realization spreading across his face. His posture stiffened, his confident stride faltered for half a second before he quickly recovered, straightening his jacket as if trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped beyond him. And then he began walking toward them, faster than before, no longer subtle, no longer careful, because now there was too much at stake to pretend. Lily felt it immediately, the shift in energy, the way nearby conversation softened, the way heads began to turn. Sensing that something important was unfolding, she instinctively stepped back half a step from the table, still holding the card, her mind racing but her body steady. Ethan, however, did not move at all. He remained seated, calm, composed, finishing the last bite of his meal as if nothing had changed, as if he had not just revealed himself as the man who owned everything around them. Victor reached the table, his voice carefully controlled but edged with urgency. "Sir," he said, forcing a polite tone that did not quite hide the tension underneath, "I was not aware you would be visiting tonight." Ethan slowly set his fork down, then picked up his napkin, wiping his hands with the same measured precision he had shown all evening before finally looking up, meeting Victor's gaze directly. And in that moment, the difference in power was undeniable. It did not need to be announced, it was simply there, present in the silence between them. "That was the point," Ethan replied quietly, his voice calm but carrying enough weight to cut through the noise of the room. Victor swallowed slightly, nodding too quickly. "Of course, sir, if I had known, I would have ensured everything was prepared to your standards." Ethan tilted his head just slightly, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "You did." Ensure something, he said, and the words hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. Victor's expression flickered, confusion mixing with concern. Sir, he asked, unsure. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly toward Lily, then back at Victor. You ensured that I was invisible, he said, and the simplicity of the statement made it impossible to deflect. Victor's face tightened, his smile faltering completely now. That was not my intention, he said quickly, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Because everyone within range could feel the truth in Ethan's voice, Lily stood frozen, her heart beating faster now, not from fear but from the weight of what was unfolding, because this was no longer private, this was becoming something public, something that could not be undone. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze sweeping the room slowly, taking in the guests, the staff, the polished illusion that had been so carefully maintained. This restaurant prides itself on excellence, he continued, his voice steady, not raised, but carrying effortlessly across the nearby tables. Service, presentation, experience. Victor nodded quickly. Yes, sir, absolutely. Ethan's eyes returned to him, sharper now, and yet tonight, the only person who delivered that was her, he said, gesturing subtly toward Lily, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to pause, all eyes shifting to her, the waitress no one had paid attention to just an hour ago, now standing at the center of something much larger than herself. Victor's composure cracked further, his jaw tightening as he struggled to respond. She went against instructions, he said, grasping for control, but Ethan's expression did not change. Exactly, he replied, and in that single word, everything shifted, because what had been seen as a mistake was now being redefined as the only thing that had been done right, and as the silence deepened around them, one thing became clear to everyone watching: this was not just a conversation anymore. This was a reckoning, and no one in that room could look away. Victor opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out at first, the carefully constructed authority he had carried all evening now unraveling under the quiet weight of Ethan's presence, and for a moment, the entire restaurant seemed suspended in silence, the soft music still playing in the background but no longer noticed, the clinking of glasses fading as conversations died mid-sentence, because everyone understood now that something real was happening, something that could not be smoothed over with a polite apology or a forced smile. Victor finally cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Sir, if there has been any misunderstanding, I assure you we can correct it immediately, he said, his tone measured but strained. Ethan did not respond right away. Instead he reached for the glass of water Lily had placed earlier, taking a slow sip before setting it back down with the same calm precision, as if time itself moved differently around him. This is not about correcting a misunderstanding, he said quietly, his voice steady but firm. This is about understanding exactly what is already here. Victor's jaw tightened again, his eyes flickering briefly toward the staff who had begun to gather subtly at the edges of the room, drawn in by the gravity of the moment. We follow protocol to maintain a certain standard, Victor replied, trying to justify, trying to rebuild his ground, but Ethan's gaze did not waver. A standard that excludes people based on how they look, he said, not raising his voice, but making the words impossible to ignore. Lily stood still beside the table, her heart pounding in her chest, not from fear anymore, but from the realization that everything she had quietly believed was now being spoken out loud, in front of everyone. Victor shook his head slightly. That is not our policy, he insisted, but even he sounded unsure now, because the truth had already been exposed in action, not words. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Victor's. Policy is not what is written, he said, it is what is practiced when no one is watching. The sentence landed with a quiet finality that left no room for argument, and for the first time, Victor looked away, his composure slipping just enough to reveal the weight of what he was facing. Ethan let the silence sit for a moment longer, allowing everyone in the room to feel it, to process it, before he continued. Effective immediately, he said, his tone shifting subtly, becoming more decisive, more authoritative. You are relieved of your position. The words were not loud, but they carried across the room like a ripple, unmistakable and irreversible. Victor froze, his face paling slightly. Sir, please, I can explain, he said quickly, but Ethan shook his head once, not harshly, just definitively. There is nothing to explain, he replied. You showed me everything I needed to see, and just like that, it was done. No raised voices, no drawn-out confrontation, just a decision made with clarity and finality, the kind of decision that did not need to be repeated to be understood. Victor stood there for a second longer, as if trying to process the reality of what had just happened, then slowly stepped back, his presence shrinking in a way no one had ever seen before, as he turned and walked away. The authority he once held gone in a single moment. The room remained quiet, the staff exchanging glances, the guests watching with a mix of shock and fascination, because this was not something they expected to witness during a dinner service. Ethan's attention shifted then, returning to Lily, and the intensity of the moment softened just slightly, not disappearing, but changing, becoming something more focused, more personal. You stood where others stepped back, he said, his voice quieter now. Meant only for her, that matters. Lily swallowed, still holding the card, still trying to process everything that had just unfolded. I was just doing what felt right, she said softly. Ethan nodded. That is exactly why it matters, he replied, and as the room slowly began to breathe again, conversations returning in hushed tones, one thing remained clear: the balance had shifted, and in the center of it all, Lily was no longer just another waitress, she was the reason everything had changed. The restaurant did not return to normal right away, even as the soft music resumed and the clinking of glasses slowly filled the air again. Something had changed too deeply to be ignored. Conversations continued, but quieter now, more aware, as if everyone present had just witnessed something they would later try to describe but never quite capture the weight of. Lily stood still for a moment longer, the card still in her hand, her thoughts racing through everything that had happened in the last hour, from the moment she first approached his table to the moment an entire hierarchy shifted in front of her eyes. She looked down at the card again, then carefully placed it back on the table, her movements deliberate, grounded, as if she was reminding herself of where she stood. Ethan watched her closely, not with expectation, not with pressure, but with a quiet curiosity, like he was waiting to see what she would choose next. You could have walked away at any point, he said softly, breaking the silence between them. Lily met his gaze, her expression calm but thoughtful. So could you, she replied, and for the first time, a faint, genuine smile touched his lips, not wide, not dramatic, but real. That is fair, he admitted, leaning back slightly, the tension in his posture easing just a fraction, the room around them continuing to settle, staff returning to their stations, though their glances still lingered, still drawn back to this table, to this moment. Lily shifted her weight slightly, her hands resting lightly at her sides. What happens now? She asked, not just about the restaurant, not just about the manager who had just lost his position, but about everything that had been set in motion. Ethan considered the question for a moment, his gaze drifting briefly across the room, taking in the people, the structure, the system he had built and was now re-evaluating. Now, he said slowly, things change. He looked back at her, his expression steady, not just here, but across every place that carries my name. Lily felt the weight of that, the ripple effect of one night, one decision, one moment of choosing not to look away. And me? She asked quietly, the question slipping out before she could fully stop it, not out of expectation, but out of uncertainty, because her world still existed outside this moment, rent still due, shifts still scheduled, reality still waiting. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the check folder that had been placed discreetly at the edge of the table, opening it briefly before closing it again without looking at the total. Then he slid it aside, his attention returning fully to her. That depends on what you want, he said, and the simplicity of the answer caught her off guard. She blinked slightly. What I want, she repeated. Ethan nodded. You proved something tonight that cannot be taught, he said. And I do not make offers lightly. Lily felt her breath slow, her mind trying to catch up. I am not asking for anything in return, he continued, his voice calm. But if you choose to stay in this industry, I would like you somewhere you are not asked to look away. The offer was not flashy, not overwhelming, but it carried something deeper: respect, recognition, choice. Lily looked at him for a long moment, then glanced around the restaurant, at the polished tables, the quiet conversations, the place that had been her routine, her struggle, her survival, and then back at him. I did not do this for a job, she said softly. Ethan's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes, something that suggested he already knew that. I know, he replied, and that was enough, because it meant he had seen her clearly, not just what she did, but why she did it. Lily took a slow breath, feeling something settle inside her, not a decision fully formed, but a direction. Then maybe I will think about it, she said, and for the first time, there was a quiet confidence in her voice that had not been there before. Ethan nodded once, accepting it without pushing further. That is all I ask, he said, and as he stood from the table, adjusting his coat, the room seemed to shift again, not in shock this time, but in recognition, because now everyone knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, what he had just done. Lily stepped back slightly to give him space, watching as he prepared to leave, but before he turned away, he paused for just a second, his gaze meeting hers one last time. "You did not treat me like a billionaire," he said quietly, "you treated me like a person." Lily held his gaze, her answer simple, unwavering. "Because you are one," she said, and something in that moment settled between them, something real, something lasting, as Ethan gave a small nod and walked toward the exit, leaving behind more than just a bill paid. He left behind a shift in the room, in the system, in the way things would be seen moving forward. And as Lily stood there, no longer just another waitress in the background, one truth remained clear. Kindness had not just changed one night, it had changed everything.